Hello, Paul. Thanks very much for joining me on the show.
No problem, Carl. Good to chat.
Yeah, before we got started, we were both saying it's a long time since we've seen each other. We used to see each other on the European tour in days gone by when you were playing out there, and I was doing a bit of coaching. I know there's been a lot of changes in your life, in the direction that you took. But for those who perhaps don't know you, Paul, just fill in some details about your playing career, because it was an interesting journey, or is an interesting journey, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I turned pro in 1986. That's a few years ago. Um, Proudly got my PGA qualification. Worked away for 3 years, got that. And probably golf-wise, never really contemplated playing tournament golf certainly when I turned pro. Anyway, I was always just going to be happy enough to be a club pro, get through the PGA, and but all of a sudden, really, I just started playing pretty well, and more opportunities opened up. And even when I was in the shop, working away as assistant, I was sort of going to the tour school, and I went to the safari tour and playing regional stuff and doing okay. Qualified for the Open in 1989 at Royal Troon when Calcavecchia won.
Right.
When I was still working in the shop.
Wow.
1 week I'm serving behind the counter. Next week I'm playing in the Open, and the next week I'm back in the shop.
That's incredible, isn't it? That just doesn't happen anymore. It wouldn't
Yeah,
happen anymore, would it?
yeah, yeah. So, and then really I just probably did make a decision to carry on playing then. I sort of thought, well, I've got lots of opportunities here. I'll go play. And I ended up going to the tour school, not doing great, went to Challenge Tour and played 2 or 3 seasons on the Challenge Tour, and ended up winning the Challenge Tour Order of Merit in 1992, and then playing on tour for sort of the next 8 years or so, about 200 events, something like that.
And what would you say, looking back on those days? Because you worked at Heswell, didn't you, with Alan
Yeah.
Thompson?
Yeah.
But looking back on it now, Paul, what would you say were key parts of that development that allowed you to go from an assistant to playing successfully on tour?
Um, Good coaching from Alan.
Mm.
No question. I think a desire for me to, I love practicing, and the facilities at Heswell were great. He had at that time in the late 80s an indoor net room with a video camera. That was like unheard of,
Mm.
unheard of really. So lots and lots of time spent hitting golf balls, whether it was in the net room or during the winter. And then, on the practice ground was a good range at Heswell, good chipping area, good course, good competition from juniors coming through and good players at the club. And I think the overall environment was very good if you were keen enough and wanted to sort of work hard at your game to get better and see what sort of level good golf was, maybe initially at the club level, and then playing different golf tournaments, as a assistant pro and what have you.
Mm.
But it was definitely good technical coaching, I would call it, from Alan. Pretty simple stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I think he was far and away ahead of his time. I think probably you can get, coaching of a decent level nowadays in lots of different places. But I think certainly at that time, I think he was like, probably leading the coaching in the UK, no question.
Yeah.
And he just gave me a lot of confidence. He worked away, helping me with my swing, and that's sort of what you were trying to do, and neutralize your golf shots, and then play from there really. And I sort of always had a pretty tight short game, and
Mm.
wedge player and decent putter and what have you. So I just gained a lot of confidence from hitting the ball where I thought it was going to go. Looked up, thought I'd hit it down there, and then I did. And all of a sudden, you feel quite confident.
Yeah. Yeah. So was Alan's approach very much of sort of just getting the ball popping off pretty straight and neutralizing the ball flight?
No question. Yeah, it was trying to neutralize, almost like walk the straight line of neutral shots. And then some weeks you're sort of a bit too drawy, and other weeks you're a bit too fadey, and coming back from one to the other all the time. And and pretty neutral in how you were going to hit the ball.
Yeah.
Um, I think Alan's background, from his own game, he was a good player.
Yeah.
Um, and he'd always struggled with the club face getting a bit shut. And so he was always working to get his players with a really neutral club face so that they could,
Right.
come into the ball and it wasn't having to be manipulated and saved all the time. It's quite interesting how things have gone now, isn't it? Because there's an awful lot of top players who play
Club
with
face.
quite a strong club face. That, equipment, I think, has massively changed. And, Alan had the short club face with blade irons and wooden drivers, so it probably didn't, help as much in those days. But that was his mythology, but very simple sort of stuff, really. He didn't sort of go flavor of the month with this and that and what have you. So he was always,
Kept you on track in certain
yeah, pretty
things.
straight, simple stuff.
Mm.
And yeah, just very, very keen on getting his assistants or, players at the golf club to, get as good as they could get.
Mm. And, probably Alan's not been given the credit he deserves in many ways, has he? Because there's an awful lot of players who've had pretty good careers and successful as a result of Alan's input.
Yeah, I always sort of look at it a little bit like he's a, Harvey Penny
Yeah.
almost. You know, no one had heard of Harvey Penny, even though, he'd worked with Crenshaw and Kite and probably a whole host of other great players. But he'd worked away quietly at a nice, lovely environment somewhere in the States. And, eventually, he puts out a couple of books with all of his thoughts and, or more than a couple of books. And, everybody's looking at that, oh, this guy is he's a master, really, of communicating and making things relatively simple. And, I think Alan was that.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you got on tour, Paul, what were those early days like? Who did you spend a lot of time with, and who were your influences out there that help you develop your game?
Um, to be honest, it was never as good on tour as it was on the Challenge Tour.
Really?
Yeah. I think I had a lot more freedom on the Challenge Tour to play than I did when I got on tour. I think it's funny, pro golf's funny because for me, everything was just one step after another step after another step of having relative success. So you go along and see how you get on with the assistants, and then you win a few and you think, oh, I'm doing all right. And then you go and play regional golf and you win a few and you go, oh, I'm doing all right. Then you go and play maybe Safari Tour or Challenge Tour and you're doing okay. You're getting top fives and top threes. You can compete. It's quite enjoyable, not missing many cuts.
Mm.
So, and then eventually you win the Challenge Tour and you think, I'm doing all right. And then the tour sort of smacked me in the face a little bit. I think it was almost like mentally, I don't know if I thought I should be there. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? How,
Mm.
when I look back, I think the tour was always this thing I used to watch on the telly,
Right.
all these players and oh, they're all like, they're amazing and what have you. And I didn't have that impression at any other level. I didn't know what the assistants played like. I didn't know what other Challenge Tour players played like. I just went up and played my game.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm going into an environment where, well, I've got this impression of how all these guys play. And it seems a lot better than what I do. But there was a little change as well when I look back. I I probably regret it a little. Well, I do regret it really. I worked with Alan Fine on the inner game of golf stuff, the back hit stuff,
Yeah.
concentration exercises in the last year or so, the Challenge Tour, and that massively freed me up.
Mm.
Those exercises gave me a belief in, well, I'll just do what I can do and concentrate on that. And my swing will do what it does
Yeah.
and try and not put myself off too much.
Yeah.
And I sort of like the concept, whether it's right or wrong. It gave me a bit of belief and a bit of freedom to play.
Mm.
And I always remember right at the end of the Challenge Tour season when I won the Order of Merit. I'd won the Order of Merit. It was the last event of the year. And I went and had a lesson off some player who was saying, oh, I don't think your technique's quite right with how you do this and do that.
And you just won the
I know. And it's sort of interested me what he was
Right.
saying, and there was a little, oh, that's quite interesting. I could get better with what he's saying, and I went off on that little tangent, focused a bit more down that route of getting my swing a bit better, and 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 although I'd done that with Alan, it'd always been relatively sort of, yes, working away at it, but it wasn't the sort of be all and end all to
Right.
perfect it in some way. And this seemed to be taking me off in that tangent. And I think I went off to sort of, in fact, I went with Alan. We were both quite interested to see what he would say. We went to see Dennis Pugh, who was a well known coach at the time.
Yeah.
And we went off down to see him, and he said this and said that. And Alan, well, you know, it sort of makes a bit of sense.
Mm.
But there was definitely I probably wanted to get better.
Mm.
I wanted to improve, and that I thought was a route to getting better. But looking back, um, definitely absorbed me away from the mental side that I was
Right.
really quite good at, and,
Yeah.
and sort of playing with a bit of freedom. Now I became a bit more orientated towards my swing. And was my swing right? Oh, that was a bad shot, because my swing was not quite obviously where it should have been. And right or wrong, they were sort of beliefs that started to build up a little bit.
So your attention shifted from the back hit exercise that Alan Fine had given you, and it
Yeah,
moved a little bit more to what did I do wrong in that particular swing?
yeah, yeah.
So
Quite.
that so on the back hit exercise, Paul, because I mean, Alan, it's looking back on those times. I mean, Alan was working with a lot of players on tour, wasn't he? He used to work with Faherty and David Llewellyn and one or two others, and
Yeah, yeah.
very much, as you say, a disciple of Tim Galwworthy in a game. That back hit exercise, looking back on it now, what was that actually doing for you, do you think? And how long did you stay with that?
Well, I'm just trying to think when I think I did it for a couple of years. I started working with him at the start of one season, having had a really quite a poor tour school. I'd gone to the tour school, done quite poorly. I sort of came back, and I was a bit fed up. My dad said, "You need to sort your head out, whatever that means."
Yeah, yeah.
And like you say, Alan Fine was quite well known. He was in the magazines, golf magazines, and what have you. And I went and sort of met him down in London. Like what he said, I like quite the sort of the you know the exercises, and how he talked about how your mind might sort of get distracted, and
Mm,
trying to limit that. So I started working on that, and certainly felt more relaxed when I played. I sort of
mm,
jumped into the belief that, I've got a potential to hit shots.
mm,
The distractions that come in, nerves, or your score's not doing what you want it to, all the different things that can happen affect that potential to hit this golf shot.
mm,
So by doing back and hit and working away at those concentration exercises, I would hopefully, uh, get more towards the potential I've got to hit any golf shot. And I liked all of that theory. I liked it and got on board with it. And the season I won the Challenge Tour, I did it on every long shot. My intention was to do it. Obviously, sometimes you don't do it, but my intention was to do it as well as I could. And what I found, it massively helped my scoring. My scoring became so consistent. Um, so what I don't think my ball striking got any better than the previous 2 years, where I'd finished maybe in the top 20 of the order of merit. I
mm.
hadn't won, but I played that year, eventually did win. And my scoring was, I sort of describe it that I would keep on going. If I was out in 400, I'd just keep going.
Mm.
And I'd have the
Right,
potential then to go 6 and 7 and 8 under.
right.
If I was 4 over after 9, I just kept going, and I'd have the potential to get it back to like a couple over.
Mm,
So I didn't have these big sort of wide gaps of shooting at 80,
mm,
or not really getting low either, finishing at 3 under because I got a bit nervous about being 3 under after 9 or something.
mm,
So my scoring got really consistent because of that.
mm,
And I was just able to, during the season, have lots of good results. And then eventually I won sort of towards the end of the season. I think the Audi Open in Germany.
Yeah. For those listening who don't know what back hit is, it's that simple exercise where you put your attention, basically your attention has to be on the club head, doesn't it, all the way through the swing?
Yes.
And you say back to yourself at the top of the backswing and then hit when you actually make contact with. So essentially it's tuning your attention into one place, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not a particularly difficult exercise, but it takes attention.
Yeah.
Takes your focus onto something, and hopefully then you can't, because you're thinking of doing those two things, you can't get as distracted at all, really.
Mm.
And it certainly freed me up, that word freedom, to just swing the club and sort of trust that, well, this is going to give me my best chance to hit it down the fairway and knock the ball up the green.
Yeah. And when you then, as you say, got diverted a little bit and a bit more on the sort of technical side, what sort of happened then? What was the progression with that once you went down that route?
Well, I think I was still doing those exercises because I kept working with Alan Fine the whole time I was on tour.
Right.
Probably I got a little bit bored with some of the exercises,
Right.
and I struggled to find what, there's other exercises, quite a lot of exercises that you can do with your attention focused away from, your technique type of thing. So I did struggle to find other exercises that did really grip me and keep my attention. And all the time in the background, I was working away on my technique and,
Right.
and trying to get that right, whatever that means. And I think, it certainly affected my confidence, because there was always a reason why you've just hit one left or right or not quite, um, it was, it was trying to perfect something that's unperfectible, really.
Yeah. 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 So if you could go back and have a chat with that Paul Affleck at that point in time, an obvious thing to say, would you do things differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd really sort of have a chat to him about, staying with back and hit.
Mm.
I think, most players go in and look for improvement. It's always done with the best intentions, isn't it?
Yeah.
Best intentions to improve their swing,
Yeah.
to improve their bad shots, to get more of the good shots. Um, and sometimes you can go down rabbit holes that, we've seen it, players go down and they never come back from. And then other players do come back. Faldo came back from a bit of a rabbit hole, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it suited him, maybe the rabbit hole he went down and came back from it.
Yeah.
And other players haven't come back and they've gone completely. Nowadays, I think there's coaches out there who could help you hit better shots, eliminate the poorer shots, and might go about doing that in a different way.
Mm.
And I think that's perhaps what's more available nowadays
Mm.
than what was available, 30 years ago.
Mm. I think there's probably more of an understanding now. If you're going to work on your golf swinging anywhere, there's different ways of going about that, and then switching your attention to actually get the best out of that and perform on the golf course.
Absolutely. And I've sort of chatted to people about it, and I always bring up, say, Faldo, him to me was the player just as I was starting as a pro and sort of threw into my sort of tournament golf. And, he wanted to change his ball flight, become less spinny with how he hit it, control trajectory, all of that sort of stuff. And he went off for 2 years and worked away at doing that and changed his technique to do it. But I think there's coaches out there that if he'd have gone to and said, this is what I don't like about my shots, what can you help me with? I think a good coach who works on shots rather than a technical thing would have and could have changed his spin application on the golf ball and trajectory and what have you. Might have taken him a month.
Quicker. Yeah.
It might have taken a month, not 2 years.
Mm.
And he would have had to have applied the club differently and thus maybe set up differently and had a different looking technique. and a different looking delivery of the club into the ball to produce those different shots.
Mm.
But he was focused on the look and changing swing and into a technique that would apply the club in a way. Whereas I think there's coaches out there nowadays who would have maybe looked at how the club was impacting the ball and can we change what the ball does?
So would you say you've shifted on that then, in the sense that perhaps the older you may have asked the question, what's wrong with my swing? Now the more relevant question would be, what's wrong with my shots, if there's anything wrong?
Yeah, and what's interesting, Carl, is when I came off tour, I lacked freedom in my long game. My long game confidence had gone. You could have looked at my technique on a video and said, "Oh, it looks pretty orthodox. It
Yeah.
looks as though it should produce good shots." But I didn't believe it could, because sometimes I'd hit a shot and I'd go, "Oh my God, where's that come from?" And it probably wasn't coming from technique. It was coming from tension in my swing.
Mm.
That's where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And when I came off tour, I was going to do a bit of coaching and what have you. And I was looking at how I'd learned my golf game, and there was definitely a difference between how I'd learned my short game and long game. Short game, which I still pretty much had trusted, I'd not had a golf lesson.
Mm.
The long game, I'd had hundreds of golf lessons.
Yeah.
And when I looked at how I'd learned, so I came off tour, my short game's good. I've not had a golf lesson. How could I teach that? I don't even know how I do it. So how could
you just be developed as you were renowned for your short game? You developed a great short game just through creating shots,
and practice it?
right?
So no one had come and said, "Oh, you need to do this and feel that." And, I just, I need to chip that ball close. So I'm just going to have a go and see how I do it. And over the years, I'd developed a really good reputation for my short game, but I didn't know how I did it.
Right.
Really, I could demonstrate it, but I didn't know how I did it.
Mm.
So going through the process of, oh, I'm going to coach this, how I need to understand how I do it and how did I learn it?
Mm.
And I suppose what I thought and boiled it down to was it was shot led.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was totally shot led.
Yeah.
So this is the shot. It's 20 yards. I've got 10 yards of rough. I've got to then 10 yards of green set. And it's a bit of a downslope. Okay, so that's the shot. But then I'm very interested in how it's lying.
Mm.
Is it a nice lie? Can I get just the club to do anything I want on the ball to sort of release it and loft it up and play a nice soft shot? Or is it lying in a bit of a cuppy lie? And actually now, I'm not going to be able to play the shot that I'd like to. So now the result might be different. So I need to apply the club in a different way. So all of those things happen so naturally to me when I was playing a short game shot that I didn't even know that I was doing it. It was only when I went to look at, well, how do I do it?
Yeah.
Then I realized that's what I did.
So you were solving the problem of the shot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
And through lots of practice and experimenting and messing about and playing and competition, you develop a sort of confidence in it. And I think, one of the daft things, or there's a couple of things that when I do short game schools, I sort of talk about. Picking my own golf balls up on the practice ground, I think helped massively. You might think, what does that mean? Well, I'd hit 100 balls down the range, then I'd go and plonk me practice ball bag in amongst all this scattering of balls, and I'd go and just clip the ball.
Mm.
It was hand-eye coordination training, and I'd be doing it on the move, walking, doing it left-handed, right-handed, just flip. And you never take a divot when you're doing that. You just clip the ball off the top of the grass to the bag. And I did it. I must have hit thousands, tens of thousands of little 15-yard shots just back to a practice ball bag.
Mm.
And one of the other things that I did, because I had a nice sized back garden at one point where my dad stayed, airflow golf balls.
Right.
I used to spend hours and hours and hours on a little course out in the back garden with airflow golf ball. Have you ever hit an airflow golf ball? You hit it in a way that almost sort of hits it really clean.
Mm.
You don't take any divot, and you just whisk the club underneath the ball and off the ball goes up in the air.
Mm.
And that probably was a technique that I just developed that then I applied into my sort of normal shots when I went to the golf course, a very released technique where the sole of the club sort of just skipping and bouncing on
Brushing the
grass.
ground.
Yeah, and collecting the ball.
Yeah.
And as we know, there's less duck shots coming from that.
Mm.
And I think, people who start to really struggle with the short game generally have in their bag a shot where, the divot's over the top of the ball,
Yeah.
and it's like 2 foot in front of them.
Yeah.
And that's usually from obviously leading edge contact. And you sort of look at that and you can see how people get absolutely petrified of that.
Mm. Yeah. And then the brain goes into protection and it does it the opposite way to avoid digging it in the ground, doesn't it? And then you get the skull through the green. Yeah.
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 Or just anxiety start building up and, it's almost like you can't control it. Yeah. So, that short game was very shot led. And I suppose that's where I've gone over the last sort of 20 years is trying to get more shot led with my longer game.
I know you have spent a lot of time with Kendall McWade, who's been on the show a good number of times, and I've spent a lot of time with over the past 20 years or so. What was the sort of thing that drew you to Kendall in terms of his message that he was giving out at the time, and obviously you've stayed in touch all these years and continue to develop those ideas?
Yeah, Kendall and I met really on the back of me reading Extraordinary Golf.
Mm.
And Fred Shoemaker sort of advising me that, Kendall was a bit of a, he'd been over a few times to sort of, visit with Fred and been on a couple of schools. And, I was fascinated by Fred's book and the story that he had. And I thought it was a unique story that I hadn't read in a golf book. I'd read loads of golf books where the hero was, off on a lovely curve of improvement and eventually he wins the Open.
Yeah.
Fred told a story where it was a bit more like my story, where you were playing okay and then all of a sudden you got frightened to death of playing.
Mm. Mm.
And that really resonated. And then Kendall, lots and lots of chats with Kendall about, him having a similar sort of story really. And then tens and tens and tens of pros who we've spoken to over the years who have had similar stories as well.
Mm.
And I think it was just a very easy thing to sort of go along and sort of join the theory of what Kendall was talking about, where, we're trying to learn the game in a slightly different way, less maybe led by the technique of the swing and more led by the shot and how then you go about thinking about playing the club and setting up. And it's been an amazing journey, all sorts of things I've sort of explored, which have gone up and into rabbit holes that it doesn't help, and different other things that, certainly, I've been challenged with. And, I sort of hold the club very differently now. I have a baseball grip, which I've had for 20 odd years now.
So originally, were you overlap or interlock?
Yeah, I was an interlock.
Interlock,
And
right.
you'd probably look at the grip and go, that's a nice grip. It's a nice neutral grip. It wasn't strong, wasn't weak. It was a nice neutral grip. But for me, feeling the grip was always moving.
Right.
So it was one of those lessons that I was always having every month where Alan might be saying, oh, well, that's gone a bit strong or that's gone a bit weak.
Mm.
And when I even played, I always had a little bit of a hole developing in my left thumb I always felt sometimes if I hit a poor shot, the club hadn't stayed in the same place. My grip had moved a little bit.
Mm.
And, you think back, well, why did you grip it like that? Well, because my dad told me to grip interlocking.
Jack Nicklaus did it that way, didn't he?
Yeah. And it wasn't even a thing to question, really.
Mm.
And Kendall sort of had changed, I think, to a baseball for a couple of different reasons, not the same reasons. And I just sort of had a go of it one day. Hitting some shots, and it was funny. It was literally 20 shots, and I couldn't go back to me interlocking.
Mm.
It felt so bad to go back to it, and I really was panicking at that moment because I'm thinking, God, how can I grip it baseball when I was only having a little experiment?
Yeah. What do I
But
do?
20 years later, I would say it's been the best thing for my golf game. I never ever think about my golf grip now. I just pick the club up and it's always in the right place.
Mm.
The relationship between the club face and my hands seems appropriate. Um, and if I don't play for 2 weeks, I just pick the club up and it's right there.
I think for
It's
anybody who's not maybe experimented with that, Paul, or explored it, I think if we all grew up with either overlapping or interlocking, and the whole thing was you had to get your hands to uniting in the club, and that was the reason why you couldn't do it. It was heresy, the idea of a 10-fingered grip, wasn't it? That your
yeah,
hands
yeah.
wouldn't be working together. Whereas actually, I think for a lot of people, if they just explored that, there seems to be connections, maybe the wrong word, but there seems to be more feel generated from a 10-fingered grip than the conventional grip.
Yeah, and I think there's a feeling out there that you're going to be quite flicky at the golf ball,
Yeah.
because of that grip and you connect your hands to sort of, alleviate that.
Mm.
Um, I I think it would be such an interesting experiment to just give every amateur a baseball grip,
Yeah.
um, because I think there's huge amounts of amateurs who try to, have an interlocking or you know, a, the overlapping grip, and they've probably come from sports where they maybe have had a two-handed grip, maybe
Mm.
hockey or cricket,
Mm.
and to connect the hands in those sports with those tools, bats and sticks,
You would
they
never
think
do it.
that was absolutely mental.
Yeah.
It would be the opposite of control
Mm.
to connect your hands with a hockey stick to try and hit something hard with some force.
Mm.
They actually, for control, it's quite a big split, and then, with a hockey stick, it's hands closer together with a bit more power. But I think if you told somebody, "Oh, you're gonna be even better if you connected
You
that little
join your hands
finger,"
together. Yeah.
they think and I think a lot of sporty people come to golf, and then all of a sudden they have a first lesson, it's connect your hands,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden the game's different straight away, when really it should be quite similar in for somebody who's coming at it from a hitting background, from a crickety background, or
Mm.
I always think that, my dad played a decent level of cricket. And if you'd have said to him as a batter, if you'd have said, right, Dad, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tee the cricket ball up for you about 6 inches off the deck,
Mm.
and you can just take your time and hit that cricket ball with your cricket bat anywhere you want
Mm.
on the cricket field. You think he'd score 100 every game?
Yeah.
He scored 100 because he could almost bat when the ball being bowled at him and hit the ball where he wanted to. But if you just let a stationary ball and just whack that wherever you want, would he have chosen a connected hand grip to do that? Not a chance.
But as you say, he could have stood there on a cricket pitch and he could have moved it to the right, moved it to the left, hit it straight back past the umpire, whatever. If it was stationary, like you said, they can do it when it's moving at 90 miles an hour. So if it was a stationary task, it would be
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I think the other thing with that grip, Paul, as well, is it's a real interesting subject. I've seen it over the years with a lot of kids that are given the interlocking grip, and it's for a lot of kids with relatively small hands. The ironic thing is, we were told Jack Nicklaus did that because he had small hands. But
Yeah.
for a lot of kids who do have small hands and they use an interlocking grip, it's probably the worst possible thing because it gets the club right up in the palm of the left hand, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's to make it difficult to set the wrist and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a really interesting area that we're given a belief that's entrenched so deeply in the game, but actually you were willing to, and Kendall were willing to explore something a little bit different. And as you say, you could never go back to the other way now.
I couldn't go back. And if you were asking me, two or three things that have been the best things for my golf and enjoying golf, um, the baseball grip would be right up there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And you mentioned, or I heard you say, on another podcast that you don't set up in a conventional way anymore. So go into some detail on that because this is intriguing.
Well, again, it's sort of been led by, how I'd like to deliver the club into the ball. So, all of these things are sort of led by something, tendencies that you have. And I suppose over the years, my tendency has been to be a little bit of a hicker of the golf ball
Right.
with the irons.
Mm.
So I would be a clean striker. Somebody might come along and go, "Oh, you're not taking much of a divot there. That's really great, shallow and what have you."
Mm.
And as so often is the case, the player himself is, "Well, I'd like to take more of a divot." You always want something that you don't
Not
do,
doing.
can't do as much. And I think, I've always looked at trying to compress the ball a little bit better.
Mm.
So, obviously a slightly steeper, sort of application of the club into the ball and connecting the ball and driving it forward and taking a bit more of a divot was always something that interested me. And again, Kendall sort of said to me, "Well, you've got the club behind the ball and then you're trying to sort of create that sort of um, decline strike into the back of the ball. Why don't you just start with the club about 8 inches, a foot behind the ball in a sort of preset,
Yeah.
showing you almost the direction the club's going to travel
Right.
over the last foot or so into the back of the ball?"
Mm.
So all of a sudden I've sort of got the club up in the air. I've got it about a foot away from the golf ball, but it's almost in the place that it would be that foot into my normal golf swing. But I've not started with the club on the floor. Now starting with the club in the air.
Right.
And, initially you're thinking, "Oh my God, I can't hit how can I hit the ball from there?" But when again, you think about hockey and cricket, no one starts with the bat or the stick behind the ball. It's up in the air, ready to sort of move and so I just started practicing like that. And that's probably my other thing in my top three things that I would, have enjoyed the most in golf is this new preset position. And it just gives me a really um, unthinking backswing. Don't even think about the backswing. The
Do you
club's
feel
all
like there's a natural flow of motion with that setup?
yeah, because it's not stuck on the floor.
Mm.
It's up in the air.
Mm.
And I'm
It's
starting
already in some kind of motion.
yeah. So I'm sort of doing obviously some sort of waggles and what have you, and then the club's up in the air, and then I'm just sort of swinging the club back. And what it has done, um, because it's in that preset position, it's almost that's what I'm trying to deliver at impact, and I'm already in it at address, and then I just deliver it at impact, and I've definitely been able to become more, um, I've compress it more and definitely take more divot now when I hit the ball, and I've just loved that. I've just loved it, and it's I don't think I've played quite a bit. I've played in a few events, pro events and what I mean, not many. I don't think there's hardly anybody who sort of said, "Oh, what the flipping are you doing?" You can't start with your club there. And, I've certainly seen, lessons where people started with the club up in the air because they've got an issue with their takeaway. They
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
roll their hands or they don't, open the face or whatever it might be. And a good coach might say, "Right, well, let's sort your takeaway. What we'll do is we'll start your takeaway a foot away from the golf ball in the ideal position. Just swing it up from there and hit a few shots." And a lot of the time the players go, "All right, okay," and they hit some nice shots, but it's never a long-term thing. It's just
A
this is a
drill.
little sense for you and a drill, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, just thinking about that with cricket, my sort of passion, if not more than golf, is the game of cricket, and I've watched that evolve over the years, and something similar has happened, and it's become more mainstream now that, I grew up in an era with, the likes of Geoffrey Boycott and players like that who were far more sort of defensive minded. It was all county cricket, 4-day cricket, 5-day tests and things like that. And they would start with the bat very much nearer to the ground and tap away, and then they would play a shot from there. If you look at some of the incredible shots that are played in cricket now and the scoring that takes place, and pretty much every batsman would now start with the bat way up in the air. You look
Yeah,
at Harry Brook and players like that. They're already kind of ready for action, very much similar
yeah,
to what you were talking about. But
yeah,
that would have seemed like heresy in the 1970s or 80s if anybody
yeah,
stood like that.
yeah. And I think what's interesting is that, a lot of the time people would then throw in, but cricket's a moving ball. No wonder they've got the bat up because the ball's coming so fast at them.
Yeah.
But what would be interesting would be, again, to go back to this thing of, well, why don't we just make cricket a stationary game then for an imaginary second?
Mm.
So we'll put the cricket ball on a tee peg 6 inches off the deck and let any of these players just hit that stationary cricket ball with their cricket bat. Where would they start then? They're not putting that bat on the floor. They'll have it way up again because
Yeah.
they can play everything from there, and they wouldn't even be worried about, missing the ball because they just had control of the bat.
Mm.
So, I think there is a position in the start of the swing that is more appropriate than having the club on the floor behind the ball in this aim the face where you want it to go
Yeah.
theory,
Get everything correct before you start.
and then that'll just translate into perfect impact.
Mm.
And through seeing hundreds, thousands of amateurs and myself, that they demonstrate that theory isn't correct
Mm. Mm.
most of the time.
Mm. Mm.
Because they'll start with the face pretty square aiming at the target, and then they'll hit it 40 yards left
Mm.
or 40 yards right.
Mm. Mm.
So, it's it's been fantastic for my game, the baseball grip, and starting with the club there. It does give me freedom to play, and it gives me a sense of how I want to apply the club into impact.
Mm. And do you do that throughout the set? Do you do that with short shots, or are you more conventional with
I'll do it probably to about 50 yards or so, something like that. Once I get a little bit closer, I'm probably less bothered about taking a bit of a divoty
right?
motion. So I'll then have the club a bit more on the floor and more of a brushing type technique, collect the ball and brush the top of the grass. So that's probably why. But if you sort of said to me, "Oh, we hit a low one under a tree or something," I probably then, and it's only going 50 yards, I probably then would have it because I need to take a bit of a steeper action into it.
And what about the shots that you play? Now, you mentioned early on you were pretty much a neutral ball flat.
Yeah.
Do you play with more shape now? Do you enjoy creating lots of different shots?
Yeah. Well, I probably always have described my short game as creative, and I would always say to sort of anybody who was wanting to be a really competent short game player to be creative in their practice and creative even in the shots that they choose. And long game wise, that's where I've just
Mm.
tried to become more Lee Trevino than Nick Faldo, really, I suppose. And
Mm.
I don't play or I don't practice enough to maybe be competent left to right and right to left.
Mm.
So there's a lot of, I'll probably just choose one shape a lot of the time when I play.
Mm.
But I like hitting different shots with that shape, lower ones, higher ones, over, maybe more cutty. Uh, so, it's a nice way to play with a bit of shape.
Mm.
And obviously down the years, all the top players have played with a bit of shape, haven't they? They've taken one side of the golf course out of play. And again, I think back to the tour and funnily enough, I always used to like it when it was a bit windy and almost the wind dictated, oh, hit it down the left because the wind's off the left, or hit it down that, and that created the shape on the ball. A lot of the time when the weather was lovely, I'm trying to hit it dead straight down there, and it was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. But it sounds like now when you play that your intention on the shot is really clear. It's led by that intention of what you're trying to do with the golf ball.
Absolutely. And that's always what I'm trying to do during a summer season of, up here in Glasgow. I'll get distracted just like everybody else does. And you go and play and you sort of hitting shots and then you hit a really good one or something. And, you feel something a little bit different. Maybe that's the feel. If I just keep doing that feel, I'll always produce the shot I want.
Mm.
And you go down a little up and you play 4 or 5 holes and then you think, what are you doing? You're off again on this same journey of it's about a feel will produce the shot rather than, no, play the shot and you'll have a feel that'll come because of the shot.
Yes. Yeah. That's
And
it's such a key point that, Paul, isn't it? That I think we don't explore that enough, that if you have an intention to play a certain shot, feelings will emerge as a result of that intention, rather than the other way around, where everybody's trying to create feelings first in the hope that the shot will come out, and very often it doesn't.
Yeah, obviously through all the practice I've done, I know the difference between a fade and a draw,
Mm,
low and high. I know the difference and I know the feels of those. So if I'm going to hit a stinger left to right, shot with an iron or a drive off a tee or something, I just want it chasing out there. It's going into the breeze or something. I've got a feel for that. I've got a set up for that as well. Um, Now that feel, I can try and produce it,
mm,
or I could try and observe it
mm,
when I make the swing. And I think I'm going more and more down the route now of really trying to observe, have I produced that feel,
mm.
and not forcing it upon myself
Yeah.
when I make that swing. So, you can have 3 practice swings and that feels like I would produce that shot.
Mm,
In the past, I might have then tried to intently produce that feel.
yeah.
Now I'm probably almost saying to myself, right, okay, let's observe whether you did do that. Make the swing. That's the shot. Observe afterwards. Did I do that?
Mm,
And that's sort of where I'm moving to more and more with my game, really
mm, mm,
trying to take myself away from this very habitual produce the feel, produce when I sort of know how to produce it.
mm, mm,
And I sort of play a little game now where I go, right, okay, um, that's the feel. Okay. Um, what, 10 would be pretty good,
mm.
like the feel. 1 would be nowhere near the feel.
Mm.
Make the swing, hit it. Right.
Right.
What was the number?
Mm.
And I play that little game
Yeah.
with myself and go, right, well, that was actually really close to that feel I
Mm.
had in my practice swing and I thought would produce that shot.
Mm.
Um, and then other times I'll hit a shot and the speed might be out. It was nothing like the practice swing. And,
Mm.
thus the club face is a bit more off kilter and I've not produced the shot. And I'm going, that was 1 out of 10. That was
Mm.
absolutely terrible. You know, do I produce good shots every time? No,
Mm.
because it's golf and it's tough and there's different lies and different conditions and you get put off by this and that and what have you. But, that's where I am with my own game.
Mm.
And it's quite a nice place to be. The sort of scoring sort of game is a bit of an inner golf
Yeah.
throwback,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
It's a throwback to let's absorb yourself in a little game of
Yeah.
you know observation.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, the back hit is an observation exercise, isn't it? And it's almost like you've gone full circle and
Yeah,
created
yeah,
some observational exercises now.
yeah.
Paul, that's been fascinating, and I'm sure everybody listening will be really curious. I can see an awful lot of golfers hovering the club up in the air, at least giving it a try, and 10-finger grip. But I think would that be a message just to conclude for people? Just be open enough and perhaps brave enough to just move away from convention and just explore some different ideas, different avenues.
I think it can be scary
Mm,
to change, particularly a grip and what have you.
mm,
There's got to be a motive behind it, hasn't there? There was there was a motive for me. I wasn't happy with my grip. It was moving. I think it produced sort of bad shots. The hovering the club off the deck, there was a motive behind doing and making any change. For somebody listening who's fed up with their grip,
mm,
think that it's not great, maybe fed up with not compressing the ball, maybe they could try them. If you found a coach who maybe offered a bit of guidance as well, because it's not sort of just simple. You've got to certainly, get the club in the right sort of position when you're hovering it and what have you. It's not just sort of having it, so it takes a bit of time, but, a bit of guidance,
mm,
a bit of exploration. They could find that golf becomes far more like it perhaps was when they played cricket or hockey, and it felt a bit
yeah.
freer and
Yeah.
easier, and
Yeah.
they just enjoyed it a bit more rather than this there's only one way to do it, and golf seems really hard.
Yeah, and unnatural for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if people want to get in touch with you, Paul, is there any way they can do that if they've got
Oh,
any
I'm
more
I'm sort
questions?
of I'm at a secret base up in Glasgow. Very difficult to get in touch with me.
Right.
Probably best to get in touch via you, Carl.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That they'll be even more intrigued now, the fact that they can't get hold of you. I'll be
Well,
inundated.
yes, they're very difficult to get hold of me.
It's like the restaurant that you can never book a table. It's you
Yeah,
want to get in there even more.
it would be a bit like that for a lesson, yes.
Right. Right. Paul, it's been a great trip down memory lane, and great to catch up. And do appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
No, it's been great to chat, Carl. Good to see you again.